Alongside the title being composed based on the authentication mode, the authentication button also behaves in the same way, so we want to write some tests to assert the composition of this also. We'll start by creating a new authentication button test class, setting up the compose rule in the process. Next, we'll write the first test within this test class, which will be used to assert that the sign-in action is displayed within the button when expected. For this, we need to compose the authentication button, passing in the sign-in value for the authentication mode argument. Now that the authentication button is going to be composed in our test, we can perform the required assertions. We already have the tag authentication button tag assigned to our composable from some previous tests that we wrote, so we can use this to locate the required node. Once we've done that, the assert text equals function can then be used to assert the expected text of the retrieved node matches the value that we provide. We'll provide the string value for our action sign-in resource, which represents the sign-in value that is expected to be displayed when the authentication mode sign-in value is provided to the composable. We'll also want to assert that the sign-up string is displayed when the authentication mode sign-up is passed to the composable. We want to write a corresponding test here which will mostly match the previous test that we wrote, except instead we're going to pass the sign-up mode for the authentication mode argument, along with using the action sign-up string resource when performing the assert text equals assertion. If we run these tests, we can see that things passed, meaning that the correct text is being displayed inside of the button. Alongside these authentication mode based assertions that we've performed, the authentication button also takes an onAuthenticate argument. When this lambda is invoked by our authentication button, the parent composable will use this to trigger the authentication mode. If this broke, users would not be able to perform authentication within our app. For this reason, we're going to write a test to assert that the lambda is invoked when expected. Here, we're going to pass in a mock lambda function for the onAuthenticate argument, which means that we can now use this mock to verify that interactions have taken place based off of composable events. With the authentication button being composed, we'll now be able to retrieve the node that represents this authentication button using the tag authentication button tag. We'll then use the perform click function to perform a click action on this node, and when this click action is triggered, this is the point that we would expect the onAuthenticate lambda to be invoked so that the parent composable can handle the authentication event. We can verify this within our test by using Mockito and its verify function to assert that the lambda has been invoked. If this is the case, the test will succeed. Otherwise, the lambda not being triggered will mean that our verification will not be satisfied and the test will fail. We'll now also be able to run this test and see that it passes, meaning that the authentication trigger is working as expected.